So I call it the art and science of data-driven audience targeting. There's a little bit of art to what we do, there's a little bit of science, but at the end of the day it's about taking really statistically rigorous data sets and mixing them with intuition and experience gained through doing political audience targeting over time over a variety of campaigns. I'm going to talk really at a high level for a little bit, and if I'm going to bore you with that, I apologize in advance, but I'm also going to take it down at a pretty detailed level as we get further into it. Advance Ohio is an organization I'm privileged to be part of. We've undergone a really interesting transformation from being a newspaper with a website. I mean, we had one of the world's great newspapers and still operate that, the Cleveland Plain Dealer. We've taken the content from the Plain Dealer, have put it into the online world, and as a consequence, we have extraordinary reach. We have visitors from northeastern Ohio, from the state of Ohio, and all across the world. It's a really extraordinary organization, and I'm grateful to be here. And thank them for inviting me today. So this is sort of a quick framework of Advance Local, and it gives you context around what we're doing here. I don't know that you would understand my presentation or understand why I'm giving it if you didn't understand where we fit into the overall scheme of things. We're owned by a company called Advance Publications, which operates Condé Nast, American City Business Journals, as well as the entity Reddit. How many of you guys go to Reddit for information? Very, very cool. So we own the company. We don't touch it. It operates as a complete standalone entity. It's one of our social experiments in internet engagement and conversation. We learn from it by watching it. It's a very, very cool thing to have in our portfolio. We operate a series of 11 local news and information websites across the country, Advance Ohio being one of them. We have about 70 million monthly unique visitors coming to those properties with about 700 million page views. So we're running at pretty decent scale. We're not the largest entity around, but we're firmly in the middle. We rank about number 50 in the overall internet traffic for all websites in the country if you roll us all up into a single platform. So we have a fairly clear view of data because of that. So what's audience targeting? It's actually a name that means nothing. Some names really mean something, right? If you're a data scientist, it means that you have a PhD and you spend all of your time understanding the nuances of data and can do statistical regression modeling. Audience targeting really isn't like that. It's a discipline that's built around the idea of using data points to build out audiences that capture people across networks, across devices, across platforms, based on declared, observed, and predictive behavior points. Basically, it's a question of mixing and matching data, mixing and matching content to build audiences that are actionable for an advertiser at the moment in time when a consumer is ready to receive that message. That's sort of what we do here. But my colleague Amy Rohr gave me a different way of looking at it. Her kids love Captain America. And Captain America said, Zola's algorithm uses people's past to predict their future. And I think that's the best definition of audience targeting I've ever seen. I've been trying to get a better one, but until I come up with it, Amy's definition stands. So when I think about politics and political audience targeting, like so many other things in America, it goes back to Ben Franklin. He was the first guy to figure it out. He made ads in Poor Richard's Almanac that were politically targeted, causing Americans to feel like we're part of America. The illustration of a snake cut in pieces is illustrating the original states of the 13 colonies. And his argument is that if we're divided, we won't be together. That was the first audience targeting that I can find. Newspapers historically were the place of record for two aspects of audience targeting. One was print advertising from candidates. But importantly, we were a place where the community would go to understand what we thought about candidates based on endorsements. It was always a very important and remains an important function of being a news organization to invite candidates to come and visit with our editorial boards and share their perspective on the issues and what they would do about it. It's come to a whole new level. One of our publications in Michigan just did an editorial endorsement or negative endorsement on a candidate for a representative seat within their district. It was a one-word editorial that said, no. So we've come a long way in terms of how editorials work within the newspaper industry. I think the first social sharing that I've ever seen was an example of an early political button from General Taft, one of the great presidents from Ohio. I think as people began wearing buttons, we began saying what we thought about audiences or about politics and began wearing that on our sleeves. I think it was aimed at very early social media. And when I look at the range of buttons, this was really how we identified between posters, buttons, and newspaper ads. That was how we learned about candidates and what our friends and colleagues thought about it. But then something really interesting happened in the 1960s. In 1960, or actually in 1952, when Dwight Eisenhower ran for president, the Disney studios actually built an ad called "I Like Ike." And it was this happy little ad that didn't really say anything, but it showed images of sunshine and happy people marching to the White House. It was really an early example of psychographic targeting, where we wanted to be like Ike, we wanted to be able to enjoy those good times. Madison Avenue really pushed it forward in 1964 when Lyndon Johnson ran for president. This ad only ran one time. It was a picture of a child with a daisy peeling the petals off with a countdown for a bomb detonation in the background. It ran one night during a Monday night movie, but it's become legendary as an example of psychographic targeting that really drives emotions around a candidate. You guys will probably all remember the Willie Horton ad from the George W. Bush campaign, the George Bush Sr. campaign in 1988, where the ad was about a scary-looking person that scared people, and then remember Hillary's, it's 3 a.m., who's going to pick up the phone call? So this is where audience targeting was for the longest time in politics, but it's beginning to really change. There was no segmentation in audience targeting. You look at Ronald Reagan's message in 1980, it was so broad, you know. What did it really say? How did it really segment anything out? Al Gore, this household supports Al Gore. What the heck does that say, right? Who does it speak to? Does it actually mean anything to anybody? I think it means absolutely nothing. It's just a cool picture. Maybe that's why he lost. So segmentation really began to develop around the work that George Gallup did with the Gallup organization and what A.C. Nielsen did around television extending into the world of politics. We started to get understanding about consumer sentiment or voter sentiment, but increasingly that's become under challenge for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that polling questionnaires are getting so complicated and so detailed that it takes so long to sit through a 30-question panel that very few people will answer questions when you reach them on their desktop phones at home. And if they do take the time, by the time they get 5 minutes into it, they're like, and they give answers that may not be really valid. Look at the complexity of this question. Hearing this, if the election for U.S. Congress is being held today, blah, 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 right? It's a tough way of learning about people. And on top of that, what we're finding is that polls are growing in difficulty because people don't answer desktop phones at home anymore. How many people have a desktop or have a phone at home? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, even if we're off by half, 8 out of 60. So polling is really under attack as a way of understanding how to target audiences. And one of the functions of polls historically has been not to understand sentiment, but as actually to deliver a negative message for a political party. You know, how do you feel about the fact that that the Democratic opponent has a history of eating babies? You know, are you in favor or opposed to that? So, you know, that kind of crazy questioning used to be really effective for political audience targeting, but it's not anymore. And on top of that, you know, when you look at cell phone traffic, it's just going wildly away from desktop or from home views. We see about 60% of all the traffic coming to advanced properties coming in through mobile devices today, and we think that number is going to keep raising. And we see that number coming through Facebook, we see it coming from Google, we see it coming from all different directions. The metaphor of a desktop homepage is quickly evaporating in our business, as it is for the polling organizations. So, what does that have to do with audience targeting? Here's the answer. What's happening today is that offline data and online data is all being collected, gathered, packaged, and sold to organizations for the benefit of creating audience profiles that are targetable and actionable, both in the consumer world as well as the political world. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the political stuff works today. So, how many guys of you have ever used Kayak to book a trip? 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot of you? Yeah, half of us. So have you ever looked at the privacy policy from Kayak? Anybody ever clicked on privacy? It's astonishing what it says. By using the platforms, you give us your free, unambiguous, and informed consent to use any of the cookies and tracking tools mentioned in this policy. It's all for sale. The way they make their money, they make a small margin on trips that are booked, but they make equally as much money by selling the data about what you're looking for to organizations that are trying to sell you other stuff. Have you ever had the experience of going to Kayak and then within a few minutes being remessaged by something you were looking at? You're nodding, you know what I'm talking about. I see it all the time. Usually it's a day late, but it's amazing how much data we agree to give up. If you were to look at Facebook's privacy policy, what they tell you is that they will collect data on you when you're on Facebook, as well as anytime you're on a website that has Facebook linkages to it. So for example, if you check into a page using your Facebook ID, if you like something on a page on a website using your Facebook ID, all that data becomes collected by Facebook, and they basically say we can do whatever with it we want. There's no limitations, it's ours now. You use our service, and as a result of using the service, we can do with whatever you want with the data. So it's created an ecosystem that's rich in interesting data based on observed behaviors rather than declared behaviors. With a poll, you say, somebody asks you, how do you feel about candidate X? And you say, I feel strongly, I don't feel strongly, I'm in favor, or I'm opposed. With the internet, you actually reveal what you think about by the choices you make around the content you read and the things you like and the actions you take. So it's becoming really an accurate way of getting data about what individuals are doing. So when you look at the world of modern audience targeting, within the political world, there are 4 key things that campaigns do. The first is that you're about either creating a registration database or a consumer database or a voter database of people who are interested. You notice most of Hillary's ads so far have all been about, are you with us? Add your name. Really what they're trying to get to are email addresses. They're trying to get to a way to maintain a relationship with you. It's very little about persuasion so far, even though we're so deep in the cycle. It's almost all about building relationships and having ways of accessing you and asking for money and then driving your get out the vote turnout. Fundraising becomes the next step of it. Now that I know who you are, I can go and ask you for money, particularly around issues that you may care about, and we'll talk about that in a minute. From there, it's all about get out the vote or persuasion, followed by actual get out the vote. So those 4 aspects of a political campaign are all deeply influenced by audience targeting. Every one of them has its own unique targeting strategies and methodologies, and we'll talk about that. So the way that audience targeting for political campaigns work starts with voter file data. So how many of you guys know that you can go to the Ohio Secretary of State website online and get voter file data for all of Ohio and download it? Pretty cool, right? What's in that data? Have you ever looked to see what's in those files? A lot of information, right? Name, address, whatever you fill out when you register to vote, all that data goes into the online world. In addition, they record your vote history, not necessarily who you voted for, but did you turn out in the last election? Did you turn out in the last primary? Did you turn out in the last 2 primaries? All of that data makes its way into databases. And we build audience profiles based on voter history, demographics, party affiliation, all the basic information you provide when you register. And then we map that out with consumer data around your income. Do you own rent? What kind of magazines do you subscribe to? You can learn a lot about somebody by the magazines they subscribe to or the websites they read. If you're reading about yachting, for example, you may be a higher net worth individual than if you're reading about hot rods. Just saying. Geographic, census data makes its way into the voter models today. Election results are part of statistical modeling, and then Bureau of Labor Statistics data around the geography you live in all ties into voter models. So all of this information is coming together from the offline world into the online world. Specialty data around, are you a nurse, are you a hunter, what your career is, what your occupations, what your interests are. And then importantly, civic transaction data that's publicly reported is making its way into voter models today. So if you give money to a campaign or to a charitable cause, you declare that. That ends up being in public records. Volunteer data, Facebook likes, petition signers, all that data shows up as audience targeting data within voter models. When it all comes together, what you end up with is a voter model that talks about everything from your voter file data in terms of what party you're registered with, to what content you consume, do you volunteer, what kind of civic transactions do you do. So here we have an individual who has a voter file that says he lives in a house with other Republicans, a consumer who watches TV and subscribes to yacht magazines, somebody who is registered Republican, somebody who's a civic transaction identified as a strong supporter of a political cause, someone with a donation history of donating $25, someone who did an online petition and supporting the Ryan budget, and somebody who has census data that reports that they live on a block with an average income of over $1 million. So I think this person is this guy. I'm not sure, but it fits the profile. That's what a voter model looks like, right? Is it begins to pinpoint that. The way it plays out in actual fact is what you see on the screen here. This is an actual voter model from an advocacy campaign done in the Washington, D.C. DMA relative to an organization that was trying to find audiences that they could reach to persuade to cause their senators to take an action in a certain direction. And when you look at the data in this thing, it's scarily amazing. You have everything from an actual voter ID number to street prefix, street name, street type, street suffix, apartment, city, state, zip, so far so good. Precinct number, right, so you can target them. Party, race name, ethnicity, gender, age, date of birth, registration date as a voter. Then there's a series of scores. This one's a partisanship score. This one's a partisanship score, meaning how likely you are to be persuaded around the message the advertiser has. And then the Clarity TNT data describes your propensity to turn out to vote. Would you have thought this kind of data would be collected against you in a ongoing basis and then used for audience targeting? Steve, you would, yeah? Of course, that's what we do. But this is the kind of data that drives inputs for voter audience targeting today. It's really cool, but it's kind of scary as well. And understanding how to use that from an audience targeting perspective, I think, is the art form in terms of helping campaigns find the right people at the right time. So when you think about how to take that data and use it as a targeting strategy against the 4 metrics of campaigns, finding, building relationships, fundraising, persuasion, and then get out the vote, the first thing you can do is target an eligible population, then secondly target those people who are registered within that population, then target registered voters, likely voters, both bases, as well as people who are in a persuasion stage. And then importantly, crossing both likely voters and registered voters is turnout models. So you know a likely voter you must be registered to vote. So that's the prerequisite. But actually having the ability to persuade based on, or turn out votes based on likely voters versus registered voters are 2 different universes from a targeting perspective, and there's a different strategy for each one of them. You know what I'm trying to say? If you have a situation where somebody has likely voted, you can approach them differently than if they won't vote but they're registered if you're trying to turn out the last bit of the electorate. So data models create universes, and the way the universe works is that you can find folks with turnout propensities, low turnout, medium turnout, and high turnout, as well as support models around how passionate are you about the candidate and the candidate's positions to understand where you must spend your time. So for example, if you have an individual who has a low turnout probability and low support for the candidate, it's probably not a good place to spend your money. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's got a medium turnout number but has high support, it's an ideal get out the vote model. That's where you want to go target. If they're high turnout but medium support, you have a persuasion model to drive them into this category. So understanding how to segment to audiences based around a combination of turnout propensity as well as passion for the candidate or the subject is where political audience targeting really begins to allow us to move the needle in a very definable way by using multiple audience segments. Is this useful so far? All right, because there's going to be a test at the end. I'm going to ask you about this particular slide. All right, so here's how it works in an applied manner. But before I go there, I want to talk about privacy for a second. Everything I'm going to talk to you guys about today from this point forward is all about non-personally identifiable information. There are 2 sort of broad categories in political audience targeting. One is that campaigns will work with personally identifiable information in their CRM systems. And when they do that, they know the individuals that they're targeting, and typically they want to engage with them one-on-one, whether it be through email or by knocking on the door. Obama was legendary in Ohio in 2012 for knowing how to go to an individual household and segment and speak to the individual members of the household differently. They would send one campaign spokesperson to a house to talk to the kids and a different one to talk to the parents because they had different messages based on what they know about those individuals. That's not what I'm talking about today. That's beyond what I think of as being audience targeting from the point of view of being an agency or a media company looking to find audiences online for political behavior. Everything we're talking about today is all non-personally identifiable. Fair enough? Okay. So types of and sources of audience data. So you guys know about first-party data, right? Data that a publisher generates, that is our data that we own as a publisher. It's something that we control. Sometimes that involves registration data, and sometimes that involves ingested CRM data. It's increasingly popular to take CRM data from a campaign's database and upload it into a tool. Facebook has a tool where you can create custom audiences and then target those against voter behaviors and against districts. We upload a ton of data from campaigns into our system so that we can target them. Second-party data is first-party data that belongs to someone else that's shared. We have a ton of shared second-party data. Typically, national voter file data is all second-party. It belongs to someone else in a digital form that comes to us. And then lastly, third-party, where you have aggregated data sources from multiple providers, where we don't have any control over the data collection or the data packaging, but we have the ability to use it. So we're all in the business of generating either first-party data that becomes third-party data or third-party data that's used as first-party data, but it's important to keep it all straight in terms of knowing the different segments. And then there are a number of different providers. So Facebook is probably the coolest political audience targeting platform today. Within their ecosystem, the data they collect from their readers or from their users is completely powerful. The ability to upload custom audiences into Facebook is completely powerful, but it's not the end of the universe. It's only a component of the universe. There's a company called Audience Partners that makes voter file data. They take national voter file data from across the country and break it down. I'm going to show you some of that. There's another company called L2 that came out of the Obama 2012 campaign. That's a huge political data provider, and they've begun innovating in a way that they take political audience targeting data, they take voter file data, and then they merge it with consumer data and interest data to create custom audiences that are specific around key issues or topics. And then lastly, there's a company called AdStratum, which is something that belongs to us, where we're in the same business of collecting data from content consumption and packaging it in such a way that we can use it to create targetable audiences to find persuasion. So I think we'll see more and more companies in this space over time, but right now these are the major guys that are available. Facebook and us both have a model where if you want to use our data, you must buy advertising through us. L2 and Audience Partners will make their data available through data management platforms if you want to do it yourself. Okay, so here's the dilemma around audience targeting in the political world. We have 350 million Americans, right? Roughly, yeah? 280 million of those are adults. 160 of them are registered to vote. 58 million of them are consequential, meaning they live in a place where their vote really matters. For example, I lived in Louisiana for many years, and within the political context of Louisiana, my vote did not matter because the state was predictably going to go one way regardless of how I voted. So really, we have a smaller universe. Ohio is probably one of the most consequential states, probably the most consequential state in the United States. So identifying universe of consequential voters that then lead to targeted voters that are actually going to flip the election, then leading to a specific voter that's going to contribute to a larger audience. One of the reasons that Ted Cruz was able to win so many races against Donald Trump when he was less popular was he had a better data view than Trump did. Trump counted on popularity, and in the end it proved to be right. But targeting individuals in an aggregate sense is a really powerful capability coming out of political audience targeting. So the way it actually works in practice is that when we look at a universe of high information news and information readers within Ohio, we can find 3 million uniques. When I then further segment them out based on income, interest and income inequality, based on having an interest in education and having a household income greater than $50,000, that number drops to 1.2 million. But then we begin segmenting them out by counties. You can see it drops even further. But the cool thing is that by using up political audience targeting data, you can go from a large group of people, you can shape them with qualifying interests, and then you can target them based on their geography as well as their turnout history relative to previous elections to begin finding universes of individuals that will move the needle for a campaign. Question, is this applicable to you guys from an agency perspective? Do you ever see value for this? Is this the kind of problem you're trying to solve? I see one person nodding. Thank you. Anyone else? A little bit? Okay, cool. This is kind of esoteric stuff in terms of the guts of how this thing works, but I think it's really interesting myself. I'm glad to share it with you today. All right, so voter file data builds the base, right? And this is a screenshot from a data management platform showing where that voter file data lives. what we're looking at, in this case, this is audience partners data. And you can see that we have party affiliation for about 79.3 million Americans. We can figure out, are you registered to vote? We can look at gender. We can look at marital status. We can look at, are you a Democrat, are you a Republican, or are you unaffiliated, are you others? As well as vote frequency in the general, and then if the screenshot went down, you can see vote frequency in the primary as well. This is the base of all political audience targeting data, this basic voter file data. The second component is issue voter data. We're beginning to see issue voter data come in to data management platforms now. So you can see political affiliation by party. In this case, they have a little bit fewer uniques than Audience Partner does, but they're finding people who are supporters of the Second Amendment, individuals who are active military, people who oppose Affordable Care Act, people who support Affordable Care Act. So if you're looking to shape a political audience based on a position that a candidate has, using this kind of data to do it gives you the ability to identify a universe of individuals that are both registered to vote and live in a geography and that have particular passions. You take it down one step further, there's a company called Haystack DNA, and they're actually getting into the world of people who care about death penalty, people who have a position on abortion, on energy, on environment, on fiscal views, data on fracking. It's becoming really possible now to begin do micro-targeting on individuals based on, do you live in a geography, are you registered to vote, and do you have a position one way or the other. The location targeting data is starting to get really interesting as well. Historically, it's been hard to do targeting against geographies, particularly around congressional districts or judicial districts. We're beginning to see all of that data. We're beginning to see all that data come online now in the political audience targeting world. So you can target people in a specific legislative district. You can't go down to the precinct level yet with commercial targeting data. That tends to be in the world of very specialized data providers, but we're very much getting there. So additionally, we're actually doing some work where we're mapping out specific congressional districts, and we're taking races down to a very low level. So as we get closer to the election, we'll be mapping out people who have concern about school board districts and local city council races. And that doesn't sound like it's a really important thing, but when you really get down to it, national polling lets you understand the national campaign. Statewide polling is prevalent for national or for statewide races, but it's really difficult to get polling for a race where 20,000 people might vote for a school board. But you know, when you look at what the Republican Party did in Texas over the last decade, they started with school boards, they built up to city councils became county commissions became statewide offices, which created national candidates. So being able to get down to that granular level of understanding audiences is a really powerful capability, and it allows you to begin to play with local candidates in a data-driven way that has historically never been possible due to the limitations of polling as it relates to a hyperlocal race. So one thing that we're beginning to see, I showed you Haystack DNA data talking about interest and sentiment relative to reproductive rights. This is something that we've been doing where we're taking data from content that we're running on cleveland.com and are mapping it out into data segments. So the article was about John Kasich being dissed by Lindsey Graham, and you can see that we have data segments for both of those individuals. And guess what? On cleveland.com, we have a hell of a lot more people that care about John Kasich than Lindsey Graham. But that data that we gathered came out of that article and many others, and is leading the way in terms of how media organizations are beginning to take what we read about, what we care about, and turn it into targetable audience segments. Again, when you take voter registration data and geography data and interest data and passion data and marry it all together, you begin to create audience targets that are really useful in terms of helping campaigns change the trajectory of their story. So issues are really important too. This is an article from one of our sister publications about the University of Texas at Austin allowing guns on campus. A university professor resigned, and out of this one article we began to gather data around concealed carry, gun control, and open carry Texas laws. So all this data is making its way into the targeting world as a consequence. Can you see how this would be useful for a political campaign? All right, so when you turn data into audiences, the way it works is that this is an example of the hierarchy of audiences we have within Advance. But you can see this is just a series of political audiences that we built out using data, whether it be first party, third party, or second party data. And when we look at that in terms of taxonomies, this is an example of an audience that has an interest that's registered to vote, that are conservative and that have an interest in taxation. So tax is a big issue, right, for politics. So we built out this audience, and 24% of the data comes from ALC, tax reform supporters. The second data segment is political donors, people who have a proven history of donating to political campaigns, which is a highly useful data segment to have access to if you're trying to raise money. And we marry these together with and statements and or statements to shape them into an audience that speaks to the individual that we want to persuade. If you have an interest in taxes and you are a highly liberal, you'd have a different take on this audience than if you are interested in taxes and are highly conservative, potentially, or not. But at the end of the day, being able to mix and match these data sets together becomes the basis of how audience targeting in the political space works. So bringing it all together, I have this hypothetical in my head I carry about Cuyahoga County when we put together our audience targeting strategies of an African-American woman who's between the ages of 35 and 54 with a household income of $100,000 a year or greater, a 4-year degree, kids in school, registered to vote, with a turnout probability between 40 to 60%, someone who might come out to vote but maybe won't, and has an interest in gun violence, police community relations, and education. So for a certain campaign, this is a highly, highly valuable, hard-to-reach target. There was a joke back from the 2012 election where one of the ad networks said, if you can find anybody in Cuyahoga County 3 days in front of the 2012 election who had not made up their mind to vote, the CPM for that would be $5,000. They would pay a $5,000 CPM if you could prove that you had that person. This is close to that. And with all the audience targeting data that's available to now, we can get there. The first thing we do is use first-party data, looking for content consumption or readership around gun violence, police community relations, and education. Marry that with voter file data describing party registration, voter turnout history, and partisan scores if it's available. Right, so now we can find passion around those and qualifying them based on their behaviors. And then third-party data around age, gender, children in the household, education, and interest in education. So by putting these data sets together, we can actually identify those very small communities of individuals that match very highly specific targeting requests to be able to micro-target audiences that together add up to enough to make a difference when it comes time to turn out to vote on election day. Does this make sense to you guys? I think it's pretty powerful. It's proven. We use this in Louisiana with the gubernatorial campaign last year. Their gubernatorial campaigns run off year from everybody else in the country, not surprisingly being Louisiana. And it was really, really cool to see the way we could begin to get very narrow audiences that would turn out based on us touching them with a message that was highly targeted to their specific interests based on using multiple data segments. So one last use of this technology that we're beginning to understand is around crisis response. You know, stuff happens, right? And when it happens, being able to respond to those individuals who have consumed content and who are aware of the issue is powerful. Particularly when you can shape a response message to A, did you read about it? And B, how do you feel in general about life? Do you tend to be pro or against the topics that are at work? And the Flint water crisis is almost a perfect litmus test because it's something that's in the news. A lot of people are reading about it. And depending on where we stand politically and where we stand culturally, we may have completely different reactions to it. So both sides have the ability to use the kind of audience targeting strategies I described to send out messaging either that resonates with those people who have a concern about what happened there, or those people who feel that it was just an honest circumstance that occurred in the, as a part of a good government initiative to try and save costs for the consumers. So, but in any case, being able to reach people who have passion, who have concern, who have belief that you can either offset or challenge or reinforce is a powerful, powerful offshoot of political audience targeting. And it's something that I think that we'll see more and more of in the PR world, where we'll begin to understand very quickly that when something happens, delivering counter messages or reinforcing messages will be a very obvious instinctive move for us to make. One last thing, I wanted to show you something that's sort of our own little playground. We looked at the Kentucky election, the Indiana election a couple of weeks back, and the polling all came in showing that the aggregate polls showed that that was a predicted 53 Hillary, 47 Bernie outcome, right? And Bernie won. He won by exactly the opposite margins. What was interesting is that when we looked at reader content consumption around the election, we came up with exactly the same numbers the polls did. The data we have on people who support Bernie Sanders and are reading about Bernie Sanders, and the data we have on people who are supporting Hillary Clinton or believe in her message, matched the polling exactly, but then the actual audience turnout didn't support that. What I found astonishing is that polling operates with a lot of rigidity and statistical validity and a lot of data science behind it. They're very expensive to operate. And we got to where the polls got just by watching what readers cared about on our sites. And we don't even have a property in Indiana, but we isolated out Indiana readers who read our content. We're working hard to try and figure out how to get it to the point where we can get our device data to match up with the actual election results. We're pretty close, and it was something that I'm not ready to go to market with it yet or to talk about it in terms of being really a valid tool, but as we're all in the business of understanding how politics work and how audiences work, it's interesting to see how close we were able to get without trying too hard. And what I also find interesting, thought you might find interesting as well, is that we're down to 3 candidates now for President of the United States. And this is data for all of advance. We see Hillary has 2.7 million uniques, Bernie has 2.5 million, and Donald Trump has 3.7 million. Now, when you look at these numbers, they actually pretty much match what national polling shows for the 2 candidates. The ratio between the 2 of them in terms of popularity. But there's been a lot of talk about Donald Trump running an earned media strategy that's independent of advertising. As advertising professionals, he's made us all look bad by using earned media, by using Twitter to dominate the news cycle every day. And you can see it's working. This doesn't speak to positive or negative sentiment about Donald, but in terms of, no publicity is bad publicity, it's pretty astonishing to see where he's at with it. And then lastly, I love this story on CNN where political badges are making a radical comeback in the age of earned media. So what started in Ohio in the 1880s is now the all-current way of doing audience targeting for political campaigns. The people who have spent the least amount of money are getting the most media coverage, and they're doing it with badges and buttons and hats. So I don't know what that all means, but it's got to be directional for us in advertising. Maybe we should get out of digital marketing and go to button making. All right, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.